So as promised, here's the first in what probably will be a series of videos dealing with BRICS and China and what would potentially be the counter to the US, European, G7 dominated world. I'll give you kind of a spoiler alert. No one's going to unseat the US, European, G7 dominated world, and not even BRICS. In fact, BRICS is desperately trying to seek ways to expand to the point where they're looking to include Iran of all countries. Like, are they trying to create like a Castle Grayskull of evil empires that they all can sit around a table at the top of a mountain with a perpetual dark cloud over it? It's ridiculous. So, in how I'm going to do this is originally I was just going to do it in one whole video, and I realized just on currency alone, it's going to be one video. So that's what this video is going to be, is on why BRICS, from a currency standpoint, will never match up to the G7. Never. And it just starts really with, honestly, all the BRICS nations rely on G7 currencies to function, specifically the US dollar. I mean, and that gives the US and the G7 absolute power over BRICS. And I'll mention this again, but those who control the currency generally control the world. And this is how much control the G7 has. From the U.S. perspective, just the U.S. alone, 58% of the global currency reserve is in U.S. dollars. And this is coming from a projection from last year. Since the war in Ukraine, people have fled other currencies to the more stable U.S. dollar, specifically from the Chinese yuan, who have backed the Russians, if not with equipment and such, at least tacitly they have, and have other volatile issues. The euro seems more volatile, as it was already, because they had members leaving. It's not like U.S. states are breaking apart, although we hear about it constantly from Texas. It's not going to happen, let's be real. But the euro is kind of losing its strength relative to the dollar right now because of what Russia's doing. It's unfortunate, but that is the truth. So the number one global reserve currency is the U.S. dollar, obviously, at 58%. The number two is the euro at 21%. Now, most people would think with how much like hubbub we hear about China that they would be the number three currency. They're not. The Japanese yen is the number three most held global reserve currency at 5.6%. So where's China? Well, they're not fourth either. That's the British pound at 4.8%. In fact, you don't get to the Chinese yuan until you get to number 5. And actually at number 5, it bounces between number 5 and 6. Currently, it sits at number 5 with 2.7% of the global reserve currency. This was in last year. And sometimes Canadian dollars overtake that. So the Chinese yuan as a global reserve currency is on the same par as the Canadian dollar. So when you look at the G7 currencies, they make up 89% of the global reserve currencies. And when you combine all BRICS currencies, all of the countries, they make up less than 5%. In fact, as part of the foreign exchange currencies, the BRICS countries hold more in reserve in G7 currencies than they do in the other members of the BRICS currencies. And it isn't even close. The number 2 holder of the US dollar is China. Number 1 is Japan. The number 10 holder of the US dollar is Brazil. Those that control the money control the world. I've said it before. In fact, the amount of US dollars BRICS countries hold in reserve is roughly equal to the entire GDP of Russia. It's not even remotely close. From a currency standpoint, the US euro hold on the world is insurmountable. When you see articles that ominously proclaim that the yuan may soon be the number 3 currency in the world, it means the yuan has reached a whole 6% of global reserves. Remember, the dollar is at 28% and the euro is at 21%. That's like saying I came in third in a 4-man 100-meter dash race between Usain Bolt, Michael Johnson, and my 6-year-old son. Furthermore, 65 countries peg their currencies to the US dollar. 11 foreign countries actually use the US dollar as its currency. China is one of those countries that pegs its currency to the US dollar. Well, sort of. Now, I say sort of because China manipulates its currency by artificially keeping it low. By keeping the yuan at artificially low levels, China makes its exports more competitive in the global marketplace. China achieves this by pegging the yuan to the US dollar at a daily reference, so it does it every day, set by the People's Bank of China. This manipulation means the currency currently purposefully undervalued by 20 to 50%. Investors and nations are unlikely to replace their stores of dollars with yuan because a few Chinese elites set the daily rate and not market forces. And the currency is always set as an undervalued asset. As such, investors in the yuan is small. That's why there's only 5% or 2.8% or 7% of their global reserves. They consistently manipulate their currency to keep it artificially low, and that way they can just print and print and print money, which is what they do. Now, despite being only 3%, and that's rounding up, of the total reserve currency, there is equivalent to 1.4 trillion US dollars in circulation in Chinese yuan. Now, the US, by comparison, has 2.1 trillion in circulation, but they make up 58% of the total global reserve currency. The Chinese print so loans can be made, which means people are employed, even if it means creating roads to nowhere and ghost cities, which, seriously, Google it, the Chinese ghost cities. There's dozens and dozens of them that they just built to keep people employed. You know why? Because working people don't rise up against their government. Their debt, which is massive at 250% and possibly even 300% now, because I'm going by last year's numbers, it's unsustainable. The U.S. national debt is 134%. Now, when I say national debt, I mean both public and private debt holdings. And that's why foreign investment in China has fallen 20% this year. This country, China, is the cornerstone of BRICS, and it is failing. So this is one aspect, and I'm going to do videos on other aspects, but I feel that currency and their economy is one of the biggest reasons, because BRICS is an economic alliance. And I guess I'm a bit late to this, but if you don't know what BRICS is, it's the economic alliance between Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. And they're usually considered the counter to the G7, which is the US, Euro, Japanese, UK-led organization. Now, Russia's currency has, on the other hand, has seen a rebound since the beginning of the war, but make no mistake, it's artificial. Capital controls, such as rocketing interest rates to 20% to generate demand in its currency, whereas the U.S. sits at 1.75%. The rising exports of energy from Russia and its falling imports due to sanctions have strengthened the Russian currency since it plunged in the weeks after the invasion. Now, Russia's economy has held up better than we expected, but it doesn't mean that it's going forward, it's going to be all roses. In fact, it's quite gloomy. There's double-digit inflation right now. And most economists predict a deep recession as really their shit starts to break across the board due to a lack of parts, and their energy trade slows down, especially to Europe. The infrastructure to try and replace that just isn't there yet, and they don't have the technology to replace that infrastructure. Meanwhile, in India, another big BRICS nation, the rupee has hit its lowest level against the dollar in just the past few days. Meanwhile, a lot of smooth-brained morons will say, when the petrodollar ends, so will the dollar dominance. Oh yeah? Who's going to replace it? The yuan is backed by the dollar and is the most manipulated large economy currency in the world. No one wants it, and I've shown this. From a growth perspective, China has peaked due to its demographics, trade slowdown, and its own internal policies. The euro? Yeah, sorry, Europe. You're too volatile with your need and proximity to Russia. Countries are leaving the Eurozone, the UK. Slow policy making always hinders the United Kingdom because you have to work with national governments, whereas the US doesn't. There's a general reliance on the US, so why not get the milk from the cow anyways? You're just a hedge against a US downturn. You're the backup to the US. So why the dollar then? Well, stability, really. When the world is full of manipulated currencies, bad COVID policy, such as China and Russia, bad governance, which is all of BRICS right now, a war, hence Russia, people want something that's safe and stable. The US dollar is backed by the full faith and credit of the US economy, the largest in the world, the most stable in the world, and has the most diversified in the world. It's a market-driven floating currency, and with China's future problems, it's going to stay that way. So just from a currency perspective, when you look at the big currencies in BRICS, the Russians, the Indians, and the Chinese, it was never going to be anything but a very little brother to the G7. And even so, it still relies heavily on the G7. If G7 nations fail, BRICS fails. If BRICS fails, the G7 actually would probably benefit. And that's just the first reason BRICS is a failed system, or a system that's not going anywhere.